Good morning, dear Sangha, our international Sangha. Would be morning in France, but it will be good afternoon to our friends in Asia. This is a very beautiful autumn morning. We hope that with the fresh, crispy air of the autumn and somehow cools our worries, our anxiety, so that we can open our heart and receive the teaching of the Buddha. To people who do not know or do not have a chance to visit Plum village yet, right now when we go out of our monastery for a very short walk, because we're still in lockdown, we can see the farmers. They are doing their trimming work. They are trimming plum trees, vineyard, the grape trees. And they do this kind of work annually. And this is the time of the year that they are doing this. So in our monastic community, we are also doing this kind of work, trimming, with our practice of shining light. We are doing it for a number of weeks. And I can also see the similarities of this kind of work of the French farmers and of the monastic community. Right now the leaves are falling, so the trees, the branch is getting drier and drier, so it's very easy to trim, so that next spring leaves and flowers can return easily and fast. When I said that we also doing this kind of trimming work, it is a practice of using collective insight of the Sangha to help us to look into our tendency or our inclination. Because whatever we like to do, we tend to overdo or overwork. So we may not have that kind of moderation or discipline yet. And we may not see it ourselves. So the collective energy of the Sangha helps us to see this by shining light on our practice. And not only they help us to see our tendency or our inclination, but it also helps us to see many other aspects of ourselves that we may not know. I remember when I first received my Shining Light letter, I was very surprised. I said, these qualities, these flowers, how come I never seen it? How come I never know I have these qualities? To say this is you can imagine how thick is my ignorance of myself. I may see some of my tendencies, but may not see these flowers. And the Sangha helped me to see myself. Because it is very easy to see other people than to see ourselves, right? So this shining light practice is so helpful to help us to see our flowers. In my English class, we have presentation, and sisters, they pick out many different topics of our daily life and they present. So because I teach them how to speak in 7 minutes, So I also gave an example. I talk about flower watering. And I remember sharing that I don't remember my father ever water my flowers. And my mother, not very often, if I not to say, very seldom, they water my flowers. Because for Asian parents, it's good to correct your children so that they can grow, they can improve, they can develop. Because if they think that if they water us too much, we will get spoiled. So it's quite a different way of education with Westerners. And then I share in the Sangha, when I first received my Shining Light letter, I was so surprised to see these qualities. I thought I don't have it. And I used to wish that I have this quality or that quality of this brother, of that sister. But every year I receive the Shining Light letter, and with the practice of stopping and looking deeply, I also slowly learn to recognize what I receive from my parents, from teachers, from my education, from my culture, from my society. And I see this practice of shining light is like, of the Sangha, kind of instill the practice of right view for me, to look at myself. So that I learn to receive flower watering or constructive criticism. I don't think in the Sangha we criticize each other, but sometimes when we receive the shining light, the Sangha can also really point out to us what is our limitation or what is our tendency, so that we can see, we can overcome, and we can transform. So it's very easy to receive flower watering, but when we receive encouragement, sometimes it's a bit difficult to receive. So we tend not to receive them equally. But the practice of shining light is a practice of kind of right view, to help us to see where these beautiful qualities come from, and what these limitations or shortcomings come from. So we can really look at the root of them, and we learn to accept them equally. So it's easy to receive flower watering, but it is also equally important to receive encouragement. So I see myself year after year, I learn to receive them equally. And I see that they are very needed for my growth and for my transformation. I used to thought that, I don't think I have any talent, or I'm good at anything. Because I see brothers and sisters, they are very talented. And I thought, I don't have this skill, or I don't have that. And then one day I realized, wow, I do have something. I'm good at it. And I realized that I'm very good at following my habit energies. I'm very good at it. I think it's quite liberating to see that. So I can recognize more my habit energies. So please remember to invite the bell. we'd like to invite Brother Phật to read us a letter from a BBC journalist. He wrote this letter to his daughter. She was born in America. Yeah, please stand.
Letter to our newborn American daughter. You were born on the third night of curfew and in the third month of the COVID lockdown, entering the world as around us an epic history swirled. When your mother went into labor, police helicopters circled above our apartment building. Our midwife's assistant was questioned by officers outside the door. And when we looked out of our window, shortly after your birth, a convoy of New York squad cars darted over the Brooklyn Bridge towards the towers of Lower Manhattan, lights flashing scarlet and blue. Every day, for a week afterwards, a column of demonstrators made that same journey across the bridge, tens of thousands of them shouting the mantra of the movement, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. You gulped your first lungfuls of air as protesters across America chanted, "I can't breathe." The fires of fury were quick in coming. The most widespread racial turbulence since the summer of my own birth in 1968. America found itself confronting three simultaneous convulsions. A health crisis that disproportionately affected people of color. An economic shock that disproportionately affected people of color. And civil unrest sparked by police brutality that has always disproportionately affected people of color. A shattered mirror was being held up to a fractured country. The civil war waged on this soil more than 150 years ago never truly came to an end. And racial division has always been America's default setting. I can tell you that the turbulence we witnessed in the week of your birth was not some aberration, but part of an unbroken historical thread. All this I know and understand. Yet the one thing I will never be able to tell you, to explain to you, is what it feels like to walk in a black person's shoes. What I can tell you is that your pigmentation confers privilege. It grants you the presumption of innocence. It offers a large measure of protection if the car we're driving in is pulled over by police. The strong likelihood is that you will live longer than a black baby born on the same night. You will earn more money, for doing the same work, and you will stand a better chance of completing your education and graduating from university.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Fablin. It's a bit long letter, so we only read part of it, so we can really understand the reason we choose this theme of non-discrimination for this autumn retreat. And the monastic sangha, we try to offer a series of talks on this theme. And what we just learned from the letter is the reality in many parts of the world. In Buddhism, we call it the relative truth. That means the truth that has the dualistic phenomena. It's black or white, red or yellow, Hindu or Muslim, your country or my community. So it's always a distinction. There's always a discrimination between phenomena and people. When we talk about the relative truth, it's not that it's not the truth, but it's about our understanding of this truth. We call it the relative truth. During the campaign to run for the presidency of the United States, the vice president elected, Kamala Harris, she said something. Well, we may soon discover the vaccine for COVID, but there's still no vaccine for racism. So today I'd like to invite you all to explore a kind of vaccine from the very ancient wisdom of the Buddha, see how we can, together, collectively, we can really see what kind of vaccines that we can use to help ourselves, to help our community, to help our society. So in Buddhism, beside the relative truth, we also have the absolute truth. I'd like to tell you a story. One day, the lung tell the liver, listen, I have a cancer, and it's very painful for me to breathe. It's very painful to breathe, and sometimes I cannot even breathe. So the liver listened to the lung, and he said, why don't you keep the cancer for yourself? It has nothing to do with me. And the heart, according to the Chinese traditional medicine, it cannot stand this kind of conversation. He said, hey, listen, shut up, and both of you, what kind of a stupid conversation you have? And then the heart will look at the lung, and it said, look at the liver. It said, well, I will build a wall so that the lung will stop stealing blood from you, okay? So this kind of conversation that we often hear in our daily life. It's so easy to get caught in our prejudice, in our discrimination. But in fact, our body offers us a wonderful teaching. The 5 organs of our body. The heart is the king of these organs: the liver, the lungs, the stomach, the spleen. They all have to work together to support one another. They control each other so that they can all function and do their job accordingly, so that we can have a healthy body to live. So when the lung suffered from the cancer, all the organs suffer at the same time. And they have to work together in order to support the lung. It cannot say, you take care of yourself. It has nothing to do with us. It never says something like that. Because they really see the interbeing nature of all other organs and of themselves. In Vietnamese, we have a saying, tay chân như thể, anh em như thể tay chân, anh em như thể tay chân. So all the limbs like the siblings, like the legs, it can walk, it can dance, and the arms, they cannot walk, they can crawl, they cannot dance, but they can embrace. And they don't have whatsoever complex about not being able to do all the things that other parts can do. And because they can do their own function, that's how the body can function. We cannot have a body without arms. We cannot have a body without legs. Right? So the body has this wisdom to tell us if we are listening to it, or if we are quiet enough, we can hear this wisdom. But the mind, it doesn't seem to agree with the body. It has its own reason, its own way of perceiving things. So that's how they are not in harmony. So when we talk about the absolute truth, is the truth that can go beyond the dualistic views. It's just like the body. When we look at our body, we can really see they have that wisdom. But but the way when we see ourselves and the way we see other people, there is always a distinction. We don't really see that without other kinds of communities or people, our life would not be possible. It's just like the pandemic right now. Somebody say, you keep it in your country, don't let it spread. Do you think the virus will listen to it? It won't. It will spread. And on this planet Earth, we have only one family. This is a human family. We don't have a black human family, or we have a white human family. We only have one family. And whatever happened in one member of the family, we all suffer the same. Right now, we all suffer from this COVID. And a normal way of seeing these two truths is two separate truths. We are in the relative, we are living in a society with a lot of discrimination. So we are seeing this relative truth. How do we bring the teaching of absolute truth into our daily life, so that we can incorporate these two truths together. Because in fact, the final truth is the coming together of these two truths. We don't let go of the relative truth in order to achieve the absolute truth. Because when we really truly understand the nature of the nature of the relative truth, gradually we will understand the absolute truth. And the absolute truth is just the manifestation of the relative truth. So in order for us to understand more of these teachings, we can also together explore something we call the four kinds of standard of truth. Maybe I write it on the board. It will be better. Yeah, it's plural, huh? Is that correct, Samantha?
An N before the P. A-N-T.
So, in order to teach the Dharma appropriately to the people, to the world, the Buddha have different ways of sharing the Dharma with the world. So the first criteria is the word criterion. So the Buddha offered the teachings of the 5 remembrances. I am getting sick, I cannot escape sickness. I'm getting old, I cannot escape old age. I am going to die, I cannot escape death. The fourth one is, what I cherish today, one day I all have to let go. And the last one is, my actions of body, speech and mind are the ground on which I stand. So we look at the phenomena world, we see that we are born, we grow old, we die. So this is the phenomena world. We see birth, we see death. So therefore, the teachings of the Buddha is help us to touch the seed of fear in each one of us through the practice of 5 remembrances, so that every day we can confront our fear and go through the process with calm and courage, and not so fearful of getting sick, getting old, or dying. So when you, in the world there is whatever phenomena that happen in the world, the Buddha will use his teaching according to the phenomena in the world. That's how we call it the world phenomena, the world criterion. The second one is according to the person. People would have very different mental ability. So the Buddha used to teach king, royal family, noble family, but he's also teaching the very poor, the destitute, the lonely, the lowest caste of the India society. Depend on the person that come to him, or he goes to them, he would offer appropriate teaching relevant for them to practice. So when he looked at the people, he would see what kind of suffering or what kinds of obstacles that they are facing, and then he can offer the teaching. Sometimes people ask him, and then he would give a discourse, a teaching. But sometimes he look at the people and he offer the teaching. That's why in the sutra we used to hear, this is what I heard one time. But sometimes nobody asks, he offers teaching. So you can see this in Plum Village practice. We offer a variety of retreats for people from all walks of life. We have retreat for policemen, we have retreat for teachers, for doctors, for young adults, quite different kinds of people, so that people have the same affinity and interest, and they can join this retreat and learn together. So we can really see we apply this teaching of the four standards of truth in Plum Village. The third kind of standard of truth is healing. In Buddhism we have four kinds of great vows. Living beings are innumerable. I vow to help them all, or rescue them all. And afflictions is inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Each one of us, we have our own afflictions. And the teaching of the Buddha have to deal with these kind of afflictions, this kind of suffering. So we used to talk about two kinds of obstacles. We call it the obstacle of the knowing. The obstacle of the knowable. Sở tri chướng. That means we have a wealth of education. We have a vast knowledge of certain things, subjects. And it can become an obstacle for us to receive or to learn new things. Because we may compare, we may use our knowledge that we learn to compare with what we are receiving right now or what we are learning right now. So it can become an obstacle for us to receive the new teachings or new information. The second kind of obstacle is the obstacles of affliction, mental afflictions. We have quite different kinds of mental afflictions. Like people who have trauma from their childhood, people who suffer injury, people having a very, very painful childhood, or people who were abandoned by their parents. There's so many kinds of afflictions, suffering that people have to endure. So this is another kind of obstacles for people to learn the teaching. So the teachings of the Buddha offer is to deal with these kinds of afflictions and obstacles. So in Plum Village, we offer different Dharma doors, different practices to help us to practice, to deal and to transform our afflictions. Like people who have very negative or harsh speech, then we have the practice of flower watering, beginning anew. Or we have the practice of the fourth training of the five mindfulness training. So the teaching of the Buddha is very, if we apply to our own suffering, it is very relevant for our practice in order to transform these afflictions and suffering. Or people who have a great amount of anger, then the practice of loving kindness meditation can help people to deal with their anger. So it's just a few examples of how, when we can identify it and recognize the suffering or the afflictions in ourselves and find the appropriate or suitable teaching of the Buddha, then it can help us to heal. So the teaching here means to heal people. And as we see, every year we have people to come to Plum Village to practice, and we try to offer them different Dharma doors, different teachings, so that they can practice and bring home. And the last one is about the absolute truth. Actually, when we look at these four standards of truth, we see at the beginning, the first one, the worth criteria, is already including the absolute truth in it. Because at the beginning, the Buddha said, oh, there's birth, there's death. But then when he talked about the absolute truth, he said there's no birth, there's no death. So when we hear these teachings, we feel that there's a contradiction. We may not understand. Because when the Buddha used the relative truth, and he talked about there's birth, there's death. But when he talked about the absolute truth, then there's no birth, there's no death. And this is a really, really profound teaching of Buddhism. And when the practice of mindfulness can help us to see how we come about. When we have all the conditions for us to manifest, with our parents, with our ancestors, we inherit a lot from them, and then we manifest. But when there is no enough conditions for us to exist, to manifest any longer, we disappear. But if we learn to practice, to look deeply, we really see it is just the manifestation. And it's not really, we are getting lost somewhere. We are totally disappear. We are not exist anymore. We do not exist anymore. So these four standards of truth is to help us to understand the relative truth and the absolute truth. When we are able to understand and penetrate into this practice, then we can really see that these two truths, in fact, we will come to the final truth that they will become one, and not really two separate truths. Now let us look at the Four Reliances, which is the four things that help us to navigate when we are practicing or learning Buddhism or any other teachings. The first reliance is relying on the person, rely on the teaching, not the person. So in the teachings of the Buddha, we have the teachings of the being an island unto yourself. So after receiving the teaching from the teacher, we need to reflect, we need to contemplate, and we need to practice in our daily life, so that we don't depend totally on the teachers for our liberation. Because the teacher is the person who waters the seeds, many seeds that we have in our store consciousness. They are not the person who giving us the awakening or the liberation, but they just help us to see these seeds within us, and we have this capacity to make them grow until one day we can truly understand the reality. But the tendency is, when the teacher is so kind, so compassionate, and so loving, very easy for us to tend to depend on the teacher. In the past, we have lay people to come to the monastery to support us because they think that they cannot practice these very profound teachings of the Buddha. So they only play the supportive role and not really very active in their practice. But the teachings of the Buddha is very clear. Even lay people can also practice this very, very deep teaching of the Buddha. And not only, the teaching is not only for the monastics, but also for lay people. So we have the tendency to depend on the teacher, or to look for different teachers. After learning with one teacher, we say that, oh, maybe we learn everything about this teacher. So we move on, we look for another teacher, and so on, and we keep hopping around, but not really take the teachings into our hearts and put it into daily practice. Right now, Thầy is not very well, but we all know that he prepares us very well. That one day when he's physically not present with us anymore, we can find a teacher within us. And then so it's our turn to guide our younger brothers and sisters. So that's how the Buddha Dharma can be continued. And that's how we bring Thầy into the future. The best teacher is the one who can teach us that we can rely on ourselves. The teacher within ourselves. And have. And I think Thầy, he does a wonderful job to teach us to have confidence in ourselves. But being a teacher, we have to, what we teach, what we share, Microphone. When we see the weaknesses of the teacher, we tend not to take in the teaching. And I think that is a loss. The teaching is there for us to practice. It's up to us to receive it or not. Or we hang our practice in the teacher. If he doesn't practice, then I don't practice. I think that is it's a loss. In fact, when we do practice well, we help other people to remember also, to practice. So as a teacher, you have to walk your talk. And that is a really, really so helpful for us. Because when we share the Dharma with the people, it's constantly, it reminds us to go back and to practice. So that we can continue to do this kind of work, sharing the Dharma with the people. Without the real substance, without the real fruit of the practice, I don't think we can carry on this kind of very arduous work. Because this kind of work, sharing the teaching, and as you see, it's not easy to share the teaching with the people. Because people, they have different kinds of mental ability and afflictions, and arrogant to receive the teaching. It's not that easy to teach the people. Actually, it's not very easy to teach ourselves. So doing this kind of work, it needs a lot strength, spiritual strength, to do this kind of work. And we practice more and ourselves, and not maybe they are saying that the talk is quite long. It's time to stop. Okay, so it's still okay now, right? It's still okay. Until it runs out the battery, then I use this microphone. All right, the second kind of reliance is reliant on the absolute truth teaching and not the relative truth teaching. You know, when we have a lot of confusion and discrimination, it's very difficult to know which one is absolute and which one is relative. This way of relying, when you say you relied on the absolute truth and not the relative truth, it's very difficult because we cannot separate these two truths from the relative truth, and then we understand the relative truth, and then we have the chance, or we are able to penetrate the absolute truth teaching. So if we say that we have to get rid of one of these, and it's very difficult. But I think what it is mean here is when we are confused, when we are very confused, then we need to really rely on the teaching of the Absolute. Like when we read the sutra, the discourse on the happiness land, you hear that people on this land, they do not know what is suffering. They only know what is happiness. So when we hear this kind of teaching, we really need to investigate and to study more so that we can understand the true meaning of it. So the discourse on the great happiness, that we call Amitabha Sutra, is a kind of means for people to enter the Dharma and to practice, because maybe that's easy for some people to practice, to have faith in something that is very beautiful. And then from that faith, they will build up their practice. And then they have more strength. And then they can investigate and learn more of all the profound teachings. Because if at the beginning we offer something that is so deep, so profound, for some people they may not be able to take it. They may not be able to understand. So therefore we have this kind of sutra like that, the Amitabha Sutra. And I remember one time Thầy said, I don't think the Buddha ever said this sutra. It may be created by our patriarchs to help people to enter the Dharma, to learn the Dharma. So the third kind of reliance is relied on the meaning and not on words. Even in the Buddha's time, monks, I don't remember if I remember any sutra about nuns, misunderstood the teachings of the Buddha. But when we read the sutra, the discourse on the better way to catch a snake, we can really see one monk, Arita, he misunderstood the teaching of the Buddha. Even when the Buddha was alive, those people still misunderstood his teaching. Needless to say, much later on, thousands of years later, of course we will misunderstand the teachings of the Buddha because we get caught in the words. Like when you hear, people on that land, they don't know what is suffering. They only know what is happiness. Yeah. So we believe that really there's no suffering. But that is also, again, is the teaching of the relative and the absolute truth. Because in the relative, we can still see the suffering and the happiness. It's two separate things. But when we learn, we practice, and we really see without suffering, we don't really know what is happiness. Yeah. So the last kind of reliance is reliant on the insight of looking deeply, rather than the differentiation and discrimination. I think this teaching is really, really, really helpful for us right now. Tiếng Việt mình nói là mình dựa vào trí mà mình không dựa vào thức. Because when we rely on our we call it vijnana, there is still discrimination. There is still grasping, there's still discrimination, there's still differentiation. But when we rely on our looking deeply, it can help us to liberate our suffering. So there's a young woman who grew up in South Africa. She was only 8 months old. Her father was murdered. Her father was a black man, and her mother was a mixed race person. So when she was 8 months old, her father was murdered. And when she was 9 years old, she saw the picture of her father was murdered and burned in a car. And as you can imagine, a young girl of that age seeing that picture, it's a real horrible thing for a young girl to look at. But somehow, with her instinct, right away, she understood that her father was murdered, and it's not an accident. And she bare that grudge within her, and the resentment increased. To the point that when she was 16 years old, one day her mother had to rush her into the hospital because they thought that she has heart attack. So after all the checkup and everything, the doctor sat her down and said, in my 20 years of 20 years of experience, I never seen any young person who suffer stress like you. And your body is really, really sending you a signal that if you don't take care of yourself, you are going to die. Because of the resentment and the anger in her is so great about the man who murdered her father. And that's how it turned her body into a battlefield. And she have ulcer and she have all kinds of symptoms that if she doesn't know how to take care of herself, she can die. So from that diagnosis of the doctor, she looked deeply into herself. It's very, very inspiring things to learn. A young person, very young person, but have this capacity to look deeply into herself. And she said that, knowing that this man killed my father, but allow this man to continue to have power over my life, is very agony. So forgiving him is not something that I do, but I must do. So when she about 23 years old, in South Africa they have a commission they call Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That means they really encourage those people who committed this act of murdering people and atrocities to tell the truth. And in return, they will be pardoned of their crimes. So when she was about 23 years old, the government officer invited her and my mother to meet the man who killed her father. So they went into the prison and met him. And so they sat down. And she's, of course they will ask him, what happened on that day. And the man will retold the whole story, how it happened. And then the girl, the young person, the young lady, the young woman, she said something like this. She said, I really want to forgive you, but before I forgive you, I want to ask you one question. And the man said, yes, what it is? And she said, do you forgive yourself? And that's how the man cried. And that young woman sat in front of him. She also cried because she said that two very broken persons in front of each other, each one tried to embrace, their pain, their suffering. But she said at that moment it's very transformative for her because she knows that this man will never know what is peace. He will suffer for the rest of his life. Because he said, how do you forgive yourself if you were me? You did such a thing. And that young woman also looked at the man and see that, this man was brought up in a family, militant family. And he went into the police academy. He learned and he was trained to be a policeman. And then she thought, if I was born under the same circumstances like this man, I would be exactly like him. And that is really deep looking. She said it was very transformative for me to meet that man. And finally she said, I will forgive you for whatever you did to my father. But I also hope that, you can find that forgiveness for yourself. And then she asked to hug him. It's very healing for both of them. And the man, he thanked her for her understanding and for her generosity. And he said, I'm very sorry of what I did to your father, but I think your father would be very proud to know that you grow up to become such a young woman with this kind of capacity to forgive like this. And so she wrote a book. It's called Forgiveness Redefined. And in that, I just read one part of it. Every time you give that incident or that person power, you are inflicting more damage on yourself. So you are re-traumatizing yourself. And in many ways, you are giving that person continued power over your life. So for those of us, we still struggle with our emotional luggage, and we carry this luggage for 20 years or 30 years. This teaching is very, very wonderful to help us to look deeply and to believe, to trust our wisdom rather than to rely on our consciousness, to discriminate, and to continue to hold on the suffering. So when we are able to look deeply into our suffering and rely on our wisdom, we can let go of our suffering. We can forgive. And we have that power to liberate ourselves from our trauma of the past. So hearing these stories, we really see, in our daily life, whatever suffering, little suffering we have, it's not worth for us to cling on it. And we have many practices to help us to restore our communication, begin anew, so that we can start all over again and drop this emotional luggage that we carry with us all the time. So the last kind of reliance is reliant on the insight or looking deeply. Is actually the teachings of the Buddha, the practice of stopping, of looking deeply, so we can truly understand our suffering. And that's how we liberate ourselves. And that's how we rely on the teaching. As we learn the last reliance, we can really see it included in the first reliance. We rely on the teaching and not on a person. If we are able to practice looking deeply, we will be able to liberate ourselves. And that's how we take refuge in the teaching. And we're not waiting for someone to grant us that power to forgive. Because we ourselves, we can do this. So how do we apply these kinds of 4 standards of truth and 4 reliances into our daily life? If we have a leader who stops fear in us, who water the seeds of discrimination, of fear, of anger in us, how do we practice to see, or especially right now, with the spreading of false accusation and informations, especially in the U.S. election. People are very confusing about the election. And whatever the leader said, they believe in it, regardless of all the evidence or the outcome. So this kind of teaching is really help us to re-establish and the practice of stopping and calming and looking deeply, and not be influenced and not being swayed by all kinds of information, misinformation spreading. When we read news, there's many headlines, and it's about really hot news about killing, about person, about people. But there's also many, many inspiring stories, like the just 2 examples I gave you today. I don't read news every day, but like when the elections, I really need to know what is the outcome. I read. And when I see the headlines, I already know what is in there. I don't need to read the whole thing. But I go into a park that is talking about the transformation of people, the awakening of the people. Like the letter Brother Fablin read early this talk, or the story of this young woman. It's helped me to have faith in people, in the goodness of the people. But it takes only a small part of the news, because all the negative news dominates the news, and all the positive news is just a smaller part. So when we read news, when we use media, we have to be very selective, and actually we have to be very mindful of what we are consuming. So today we learn some tools that we can use in our daily life, so that we can really distinguish, we can really tell what is meaningful and inspiring message that our leader want to send us, or misleading, stock fear in us and let it spread all over internet. There are many good stories during this COVID time. Many good stories, very, very inspiring to read. And just one more example is the story of a young girl, only 13 years old, who biked more than 10,000 kilometers to bring her father from New Delhi into a very remote village that they live, because her father was injured, and then the lockdown, and there's no way for him to take any public transportation to return home. So she biked herself alone more than 10,000 kilometers and to New Delhi, and then transported her father back into her village. How can a very young person can do something like that? It's very amazing to know about her story. So each day, if we are looking around us, not only on the newspaper, we also see people around us. They are doing things very, very inspiring. So we will stop now.